We want to find out, whoa, there we go. We want to find out what happened, what's working, and if you're honest enough, tell us what hasn't worked. And then after Mr. Fiorelli is done, we're going to hear from our state representative, Suzanne Weber, who's here tonight. She may give us a few things about Tillamook, too, because she was the mayor in Tillamook for 10 years and a school teacher for a few years before that. So we'll get some firsthand experience there. So let's get started. Go ahead.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here tonight. The important work that you all are doing and setting the groundwork for right now is incredibly important for the coast. And I'm really happy to sit here and talk to you about what Tillamook County has done over the past couple of years, all of the wonderful work that has gone into the housing study and the outputs of the Housing Commission up until November of 21 when I started my position. So I've been in Tillamook County and on the Oregon coast now for just about 9 months. So a little bit of background about myself. I was born in Connecticut and had moved to Florida about midway through my high school years, an interesting relocation to a very rural community. My education, I was late in my education. I was a non-traditional student, started out as an electrician up until 2009, in fact. I went on to get my Bachelor's of Science in Planning, Public Policy, and Management, so focusing on urban planning and development at the University of Oregon. And then a Master's in Public Administration from the University of Oregon, followed and finally by a PhD, which I'm just finalizing now, making me a triple duck at the university. I was very, very fortunate to have come to the coast and found housing. And in fact, when I found housing, it was sort of serendipitous, I'll say. My wife and I saw an ad on Craigslist posted 10 minutes prior, and we jumped on it, and we put down the deposit sight unseen and moved forward with the rental application without ever having an opportunity to see the house. And those are the sort of measures that folks are having to take right now in order to even come to the coast and take a position. The question really was in Tillamook County, will the housing coordinator be able to find housing? I'll say that it took about 6 weeks of working remotely to be able to get to that point. I'm really excited that I'm here. The Housing Commission that was formed in the work between 2017, when a housing study was commissioned by our county and financed in large part by contributors, including the Creamery, and then on to 2019, and then finally to where we are today, we have a simple mission, which is to collaboratively advocate for attainable and equitable solutions that impact the county's greatest housing needs. And what that means and for whom that means is sometimes an area of discussion, but that's why it's beneficial to have lots of different people on our Housing Commission. Our Housing Commission is made up of 15 members who are appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. They include individuals from North County, representatives for large employers and small employers in the county, those who represent nonprofit organizations, including social services and organizations who help people who are undocumented, and lots of other groups. Real estate representatives who have their pulse on the real estate market and understand the way that property works, as well as folks from South County and Central County, and also a representative from the city of Tillamook, which is very advantageous for us, particularly as we look at our legislative efforts. By the way, we meet on the first Thursday of every month at 9 a.m. So a little bit about our partnerships. This is one partnership with the Tillamook Family Counseling Center, where we have launched a housing needs assessment specifically for folks who are receiving behavioral health services. As we think about housing, it truly is a continuum, all the way from those who are houseless to those who are at risk of being houseless, up to those who are working, poor, and perhaps living in their car, and individuals who are spending far more than 30% of their income on housing, even if they are housed. These individuals have an incredibly important role to play within our community because if we can solve some of the problems related to behavioral health, we can help address some of the upward mobility issues that folks face. I want to talk to you a little bit about our efforts. We have a few different committees with very specific roles and responsibilities and actions that they take to move the commission's mission forward. Our first is our Public Education and Outreach Committee. This committee focuses its first effort on getting information out into the public. They do this through articles, which includes programs that we are working on, housing types, including accessory dwelling units and different types of plexes, as well as the challenges and opportunities and constraints associated with all of those housing types. It produces one-pagers with talking points that include information about development, including not only the housing types, but also terms and definitions so that we're all working from the same place, as well as external resources. A wonderful tool by the AARP is a tool called the ABCs of ADUs, directly targeted towards property owners who could potentially expand the amount of housing stock that we have, as well as legislative reports and new legislation that has been passed at the state level. Information also includes charts, tables, and infographics that help to communicate our points to the public in an easy to understand way. Experience is a second category that is focused on through the Public Education and Outreach Committee. You all may have heard of the What's the Story with Housing articles that we have been publishing close to a year at this point. These are very intentionally designed to include personal experiences and perceptions of lots of different people within our community, including those who are struggling to find housing and employers who struggle to find employees. It includes statements and outcomes from cities and communities in their public processes and the outcomes of that work and those conversations. It also includes things such as programs and efforts of our community partners, like the Tillamook Family Counseling Center, CARE, which is our primary organization focusing on houselessness and homelessness in Tillamook County, as well as Adventist Health, because as we all know, housing is a very important social determinant of health. We also focus on highlighting our housing commissioner profiles. This is something that we've started to work on only in the past month, and you'll see these up on our website and on our Facebook in the coming months. And the intention here is to get the public familiar with not only our housing commissioners, but the people who represent their specific stakeholder interests. Education and outreach focuses as well on engagement. This includes things such as creating photos and videos and recordings and social media posts and website updates on a regular cadence to communicate the efforts and all that the Housing Commission is completing over the long term. It's very important that we're able to have a continuous feed to show the public quantitatively what it is that we are doing for them. We also have our progress, and this includes a quarterly newsletter, which we will begin to publish coming at the fourth quarter of this year will be our first one. This focuses on actions. It includes all of the committees, which I'll talk a little bit more on a global level here about in a few minutes. It also includes progress updates and a thermometer, which would represent outcomes in units of measure, which would include housing units that we've helped to establish, dollars that have been spent or acquired, including hours, projects, and any other quantifiable measures that are important to communicate to the public. It also includes a letter from leadership, including the representative, the liaison from the Board of County Commissioners who sits on the Housing Commission. I'll talk to you a little bit about legislative actions because this is one of our most important committees and one that has been doing a significant amount of work trying to ramp up and make a difference at the state level. Its first priority is infrastructure. That includes legislation for technical assistance or direct support and/or appropriations to expand water or sewer system capacity to potentially developable properties. Those of you who have paid attention to our Housing Commission meetings, or really just any of the constraints in rural communities on the coast, infrastructure is a primary barrier to redeveloping properties or developing properties that have a potential within the buildable land inventory. An example of some legislation that has been passed before and that our Housing Commission is keenly keeping an eye on includes House Bill 3040, which was passed in 2021, and it directed the Oregon Housing and Community Services in consultation with a team from other agencies to conduct a comprehensive study of system development charges and to produce a report that is expected by December 15 of this year. That's information that our commission can use to move its priorities forward. The Legislative Committee is focusing on buildable lands as well. This is legislation intended to increase the availability of buildable lands specifically for housing. An example of legislation that was passed was House Bill 2284 in 2013, directing Oregon Housing and Community Services, in consultation with a number of other agencies, to establish and administer the Oregon Industrial Site Readiness Program. This dovetails into work that several communities have developed and that I'll talk about in a few minutes with relationship to Tillamook County's new efforts. But this has a lot to do with redeveloping brownfield sites, former industrial properties that have the potential to produce economic benefits as well as housing and public services for the future. Another priority from the Legislative Committee is focusing on increasing density. And what we mean by that is increasing density in a modest way that fits in with the character of rural communities on the coast. This is legislation intended to enable or to prohibit the exclusion of modest increases in those densities outside of UGBs in rural counties, as well as working with the cities within our county to take similar actions. An example of this comes from House Bill 2001. I came from the city of Eugene and had been sitting on the Planning Commission to implement House Bill 2001 in Eugene. The interesting thing here is that it's called the Housing Choice Bill, and it is to expand the ability of property owners to build traditional multifamily housing types, including duplexes and triplexes by right in residential zones. The challenge here is that it only impacted cities with populations greater than 10,000 residents. Those that fell above that threshold and who did not implement their own plan by June of 2022 would have to take the state's model code. So this was leverage for local governments with 10,000 residents or above to ask them, would you like the model code or would you like to participate in a process that develops it locally? We don't have this in rural communities, and so we must take it upon ourselves to show individuals why this is important. It would be valuable to look at increasing density at the state level, working with other rural communities to make sure that such a bill fit in once again, with the rural character of our communities, particularly on the coast. They're also focusing on housing types, and you saw this come up with the Public Education and Outreach Committee as well. This is focusing on legislation intended to enable, or at least to prohibit, the exclusion of non-traditional housing types. An example would be House Bill 4064, which passed in 2022, prohibiting local governments from prohibiting the siting of prefabricated structures in all residential zones. Another important committee that has formed within the past couple of months is our Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee has a couple of really important roles. The first is to give money out, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And the second is to take money in. So our primary program right now, and one that we are close to finalizing for a July 1 application opening, is our Workforce Housing Grant Fund. These are competitive awards. They support multifamily housing development. It prioritizes rents up to 120% of the area median income. And it requires developers to report annually if they receive this award. It's funded specifically through the short-term rental operator license fee. So it's directing money from our vacation and tourism industry to creating the housing stock for the people who help to support that industry. There's also grant writing. So the committee will focus specifically on seeking grant opportunities that support housing. They will collaborate with community partners throughout Tillamook County, and they will also promote housing programs through our grant writing efforts, specifically to not only, and I'll go back one slide, not only to support this fund right here, but also to support future programs that we'll be implementing afterward, which include a single-family housing program and collaborating with partners such as Habitat for Humanity. We're also focusing on a housing property tax exemption, and this had support from our entire Housing Commission as well as input from the entire Housing Commission back in 2020. The housing property tax exemption that we've implemented, it prioritizes workforce housing, it incentivizes medium density development, it's specifically focused on Tillamook County, unincorporated Tillamook County, but cities can dually adopt an ordinance, and one of the things that we are providing to 3 cities at this point is technical assistance to take our model ordinance and rework it in a way that works for their community so that both communities have similar tax exemptions for multifamily housing. We also have our development committee, and this committee has started to undertake a great deal of work moving forward. They look at things such as zoning, development opportunities, as well as constraints. One of the things that this committee will be diving into here in the very near future is an EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant that was just awarded as of 2 weeks ago to Tillamook County. I had been in my role for only about 5 days before the opportunity to begin writing this grant arose. And I'm very, very happy to learn in the past couple of weeks that we did receive that. This was the outcome of a regional stakeholder meeting that brought this to fruition at the local level. The purpose of this grant is to focus on abandoned and underutilized properties where reuse is complicated by actual, and this is the important part, or perceived environmental contamination. Working with our real estate professionals, they very well understand how this risk perception can influence the way in which developers perceive development opportunities in different areas. And if there are opportunities to go elsewhere where there's a buildable lands inventory and much less risk, they will do so. So one of the things that we want to do is to not only conduct assessments on these sites, which include phase 1 assessments. Those are historical documents that a qualified environmental professional in collaboration with our team will look over to determine whether or not there may have been a use on that site that would warrant further investigation. Should that be the case, we move on to a phase 2 assessment, which includes looking at the subsurface conditions with our qualified environmental professional, looking at the air, water, and soil, and determining whether or not any cleanup is required, and providing a set of cleanup alternatives to the property owner to consider whether they'd like to move forward with redevelopment or to convey the property to a developer that could potentially move forward with a housing or some sort of recreation or public services project. So that was a lot of stuff to cover. I want to bring it to a kind of a global view and show you what we're doing right now over the long term. You can see that we're doing a lot of research and engagement. We're developing from all of this work priorities, opportunities, and constraints. You can see down in the yellow dots at the bottom of the screen our committees. Each of those committees is developing its own strategy, and the priorities that I showed you with those committees a moment ago are the ones that they will be including in a final housing action plan. We are doing some targeted outreach, which is in those green dots. We launched a developer survey to better understand the concerns and opportunities in the minds of developers. An employer survey that helps us understand what the needs and constraints are specifically around the tourism industry, as well as a public survey trying to get at the general public's perceptions of what are the housing constraints in our community and what are the things that could best serve them. We'll develop a set of recommendations starting in about September And those will dovetail with frameworks and infographics that are published both in print and again in infographic form. All of these will then go before our executive committee, which has been established within the past few months. That executive committee is designed specifically to oversee the roles of all of the committees and to make sure that things like our quarterly newsletter are encompassing a global perspective, again, of what the Housing Commission is doing. This Housing Action Plan will then go before the Housing Commission and be finalized through a board order passed by the Board of County Commissioners by the end of this year. This is what gives that 15-person commission its marching orders, its talking points, its ability to go out and collaborate with entities independently, knowing that everything that they are saying is exactly what it is that the full Housing Commission has agreed to say and agreed to do. I'll talk to you a little bit about data and analysis, and this gets at some of the work that we had done early on, some including prior to my time with the Housing Commission, and some now after I have started here. So in 2019, we produced the Tillamook County Housing Needs Analysis. What this essentially told us was based on a 20-year population growth forecast, we would see an increase of about 2,936 year-round residents, requiring between 2,300 and 2,600 new net dwelling units. That was a snapshot in time. We're also looking at about 150 more units per year that we need to establish just to keep up with growth rate now. So how much housing, what types, and what are we really going to need and see in the future? Well, you can very clearly see that right now we have a housing mix of about 72% single family. We do expect a slight decrease as a result of more multifamily housing density within Tillamook County. That'll come down to roughly about 60% is what we perceive. And in the future, it'll be around 69 perhaps. We'll increase townhomes and townplexes, multifamily housing, as well as manufactured housing and other types of non-traditional housing opportunities that all of you, I'm sure, are familiar, are exciting and new and could be promising in the future. When I talk about increased density, I want to be very clear and intentional about what we're saying here. When I say modest increases in density that fit in with the character of our rural coastal communities, I'm talking specifically about projects that start at the level of a duplex and go up to maybe 6 units. I'm not talking about those bungalow courts and townhouses and multiplexes. Now, in some communities, perhaps even here in Seaside, that could work well. But we want to be very intentional about the way we're communicating with the public when we do talk about increases in density, taking note and being very cautious and clear with people as we communicate with them that we understand their desire to keep communities the way that they were when they purchased their homes and when they moved here. We're also working on mapping and spatial analysis tools, primarily over the internet, in order to provide public information to folks in an easy, clear, and digestible way. We can overlay opportunities and challenges in unique spatial ways. This includes land availability and constraints. This includes housing distribution across the county, as well as integrating data sets from HUD, census, and state housing data. We can also collaborate with community partners and visually represent what it is that we're doing through tools like Esri's story maps, community surveys, open houses, and events, as well as through tracking developments in progress and representing this information on our maps. I'll give you a little bit of an example of some of the things that we're doing right now. So these are some of the enterprise zones and brownfield sites overlaid in Tillamook County. We can very clearly see which sites from the state's environmental cleanup site inventory have already been assessed and no longer have any action that's required. That's that second purple dot. We can also see which sites are very contaminated and are listed on the confirmed release list. And that's that very first dot that you see. We'll also be able to see which ones are study areas and which ones are opportunities for economic development by overlaying this information with opportunity zones and economic districts. You can also see that we have overlaid this information with where Business Oregon has previously funded projects, not only to capitalize and leverage things that have happened in the past, but to see what kind of projects have been funded and how competitive or how these projects could make Oregon and our region better. We can also look at things like the age of our housing stock by census tract. And we can see very clearly that red dot right there, those are all homes that were built in 1939 or earlier. Stretches all the way from the coast into our interior area. Those are homes that we can very clearly target for redevelopment, weatherization and energy programs, and lots of other things that can improve the lives of property owners and renters alike. We can also see where homes are newer and where there are social equity components that need to be taken into account when we start pointing public dollars at housing projects. So I will go ahead and close my presentation there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I guess I wrote down a couple here. It seems like you have a lot of things that we're pointing to just really recently. Is that stuff that's really under your purview, the things that you do?
So I work directly with the 15-person Housing Commission regularly. So all of them have contributed to the work that we have been doing.
Right, but I mean, was there anybody before you? Yes, Representative Weber.
Yes, I'd like to speak to that. We did have a housing coordinator before TJ, and that was Jake. And before that, we sort of flew by the seat of our pants. Our Sarah Absher, our community development director, was in charge of the Housing Commission. And it proved to be, with everything that we had to take into consideration, something that we realized early on that we needed a person that was specifically dedicated to this because of the problems that we have had. Before TJ arrived on the scene, we did a bylaws document, and we also did a strategic plan document, so that we had some guiding documents other than our housing study that was done,
Right,
to reflect what was in Tillamook County.
so it was a lot of organization and figuring out how we're going to move forward.
Yes.
That's exactly where Clatsop County is. In fact, we're meeting next month as a small group to figure out, okay, where do we go from here? And that's really the main reason I asked you guys here, is that to give us some idea of the kind of things that went on.
And I have a copy of our bylaws and our strategic plan to leave with you, so that
Okay.
you can see what it was that we developed. Because I was on the on the commission from its inception, and so I followed along with that. But I will tell you that since TJ got here, he is driven to make this successful, and he has, as you can see by the presentation that he gave, he has done wonderful work.
Yes, I'm very impressed. One other question I had is how is the public responding to all of those outputs you listed, and how do you measure how many people are getting involved in that, or at least paying attention to what you're doing?
That's a wonderful question. So we are sharing this on our social media pages. We're sharing it from one page and asking all of our partners to share that post. By doing that, we're able to track our Facebook data analytics, and we can see when we have new visitors and new people joining our group, as well as when people read our articles, which we also dually post on our own webpage and keep track of analytics there as well.
Okay. Do you have, I can probably answer it myself, you don't have many public meetings, at least until very recently, where people are, gathering like this and answering and asking questions?
Yes, we did. For several years, we had a big public participation at each of our meetings. We would have 12 to 15 people, other than the board, that would be present at those meetings to see what it was we were doing.
Okay, good. Yeah, because, we have a couple of pretty standard guests that will come because they're interested in what's going on here, and we hope to kind of get some momentum going where we do that, particularly when it's more known that the county is going to do it. Jeff Adams from Cannon Beach is really into this and pushing this effort, and he came and spoke here to this group once too. So, you guys have a question?
May I add something else to what you were saying? You were asking about public input. I would say, from my perception, the public is very interested in all of the action locally that has occurred with housing. I know as the city, when we started looking at density after the commission was formed, and we realized that we could, while I was the mayor, increase the opportunity for the addition of density into our community. So we did do several rezoning of areas to be able to provide for that additional density, if it was in the form of being able to put a duplex or a triplex or even an ADU in a specific area in the core of the community.
Right.
So that would be an available option for people who were building or who wanted to expand the housing opportunities. I can also tell you that there is a development going in the center of town that'll be a 46 or 47 unit apartment complex on an acre and a third.
Yeah.
And it
That's
was
pretty
really
good size.
interesting because the community around that area became very involved once they saw that this was going to be happening in the neighborhood. And I know as a result of this, I have more people in that area paying attention to what the Housing Commission is doing. And so that is another way that outreach is affecting the community.
Sure. I don't remember offhand, what's the population of Tillamook County?
26,000 in the county and 5,000 in the city.
Okay,
Close to
so
6, is that right?
It's 5,300,
that's,
I think, in the city.
substantially less than Seaside and Clatsop County then.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talked about workforce housing grant fund. What's the source of that and what are the allowable uses for it?
So that grant fund is seeded directly by the short-term rental operator license fee.
Okay.
And it also includes money that we received from ARPA funding, $400,000 in addition to the money that we had already received from the short-term rental operator license fee. The $400 came from ARPA. And then we're also looking at finding other grant resources that we can seed that fund with and also develop other programs such as our single-family housing program.
And the allowable uses?
Allowable uses at this point is looking at 3 units or larger, and we have a set of criteria, quantitative criteria, that the Finance Committee worked very hard to go through and identify to make projects, to really look at the things that the Housing Commission is concerned about and what we're investing and where we're spending those dollars.
Thank you.
Available online too, by the way.
You mentioned lodging tax. Is that the city's or the county's portion of the tax, or it's not the promotion of
County
tourism
has its own
side?
tax.
It does. The TLT is different from the short-term rental
Oh.
operator license fee, and that is specifically the money that's coming in
Okay.
from the annual fee from short-term rental operators.
Is that's a county fee, not a city fee?
The cities all charge their own fees as well, and so does the state. So there's actually 3 places that those folks have to pay.
Okay. I thought it'd be interesting if we could get Orla to agree to let us use some of the money for housing.
Please remember
And
that.
we're going to try. We're going to try.
Please remember, if you don't mind my speaking, that former Commissioner Bill Bartline proposed that as a legislative action, and he was met with, Orla didn't want that.
Yeah.
And so it was very contentious, and so he didn't get very far as a legislative action with that.
I guess this relates. I'm on the League of Oregon Cities, actually on 2 committees, Finance and Tax and Community Development. Out of community development is going to come at least 2 priorities that the cities will vote on related to housing. And out of finance and tax, there'll be one related to property tax, but the one I finally got through is one saying, please let us have additional uses for that 70% for tourism. So the league will have a little bit more push from the cities, and it was mostly cities along the coast that pushed us. I've been on this committee for 3 terms now, and I've had no luck the first 2 years. This year, I finally have some support, so we'll see what happens. The interesting thing is the hotels in Portland were able to get the city of Portland to use or allow the city of Portland to use some of their 70% portion for homeless cleanup and things like that. And they got it by going to the hotels themselves and making a deal. So there might be a little bit more there, because if here in Seaside, the biggest issue for all of our hotels and restaurants is they don't have enough help. And if we could somehow use some of that money to provide housing, we don't really need to promote tourism in Seaside anymore. We need to manage it. And there's a whole group here on the coast that is doing that, is working that way. So anyway, side light there. You mentioned the brownfield sites. The county and the owner of the site, there's one up here at the north end of town, got some money to actually do what you're talking about. I don't remember how much is specifically related to that site, but he is, I guess, hoping to figure out some way to use it for housing, and we'll see.
We have 3 priority sites that we've already identified to point some of this $500,000 at.
Yeah.
2 of those are looking at housing, so there's some opportunities moving forward.
Right. Well, to keep going here and make sure we can get done by 7, thank you very much. Can we get a copy of your presentation so we can look at it?
Absolutely. I can email this to you
offline?
directly. Does that
That'd
work?
be fine, sure.
Great.
Thank you very much, TJ. And we'll probably be calling you from Clatsop County just to say, okay, what works and what doesn't. And obviously one of the things that works is hiring somebody specifically for this job, not trying to rely or give that job to split it up among a bunch of different people. So
I can tell
these
you
are very
that
impressed.
action, we worked through the bylaws, we worked through the, strategic plan, but until we had a dedicated person to really move this forward, we really didn't make any great strides. Mm-hmm. And like I say, TJ coming to Tillamook has been a godsend.
To get into the nitty gritty, did the other entities in the county put money towards his job, or is that strictly funded by the county?
Strictly funded by the county, I believe.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Who funds you, the county or do the cities?
The county short-term rental operator license fee is the
Is
sole
how they
source
did
of
it.
my role.
Okay, great. Okay, Representative Weber, good to see you again.
Well, it's good to see you too, and I don't have much to add to what TJ said because he was so thorough in his
yes.
presentation. I can tell you that the reason I got involved in the Housing Commission when Commissioner Bartline proposed this was I lived in a neighborhood, I live in a house that's going to be 100 years old this year. And I live in a neighborhood that is similar houses. And we had 9 houses within a 4-block radius that were what were considered zombie houses. And they were houses that people had reverse mortgages on, and then, both people would die, and then the houses would sit there, and then pretty soon you had squatters, and nobody took care of the landscaping, and pretty soon they started to be a blight on the neighborhood. And so my sole purpose in beginning to work on this was to get rid of those zombie houses, to get rid of those houses that were affected by reverse mortgages. And it would be really hard to be able to improve those houses or clean those houses up because they're owned in big blocks by banks that you've never heard of before, and they're traded. They're just chattel, And so when the police would try and get them cleaned up, it was quite an effort to be able to even find out who owned the houses. And so it was, to me, it was attracting people that we didn't want in the neighborhood. They were destroying the houses. They were destroying the neighborhood is what they were doing. And so that's why I worked so adamantly to make sure that I was on that housing commission and that it was an effective agency of our county government. And it has been. It's very successful. As a city, through our planning commission, we did do, as a result of the county buildable land inventory, we did a city buildable land inventory also. And as you know, you're constrained in your buildable areas because, we didn't have the ocean like you have on one side and the hills on the other side, but we have farmland all around us. And so we were, well constricted in our ability. So that's why we started to work on increasing density. And I'll tell you that as mayor, we met with a lot of people not wanting to have their neighborhoods rezoned so that we could add additional housing. And I can understand that. However, it did give some people the opportunity to be able to add the ADUs, or if a house went away, to put a duplex in there or a triplex. And so that, it finally passed through the city council. And so we have a big area now that is available for additional density. The other thing that, as a result of the Housing Commission, we really started to look at as a city was our systems development charges, because they were horrendous. They were making it very difficult for anyone to be able to build within the city. And so we looked at different options for making them more affordable, and we couldn't really make them more affordable because of the cost of putting sewer and water, and especially in on the east end of town, pushing it out there, annexing additional areas so that we could do that. And so what we did was we devised a payment plan so that people could have, make it like a low interest loan so that they could afford to be able to build because their systems development charges would be less. The other thing that the city had a hard time with was the property tax exemption, and I haven't kept track of whether or not they have embraced that or not. Maybe TJ could tell you. But they did not want to let go, because our property taxes within the city are so low, of the additional revenue that would come from the possibility of, multiplex. And so it is an option in the county, but I can't tell you that it's an option in the city. Because you also needed all of your small districts to be able to participate in that. Your fire department and any small district that would be impacted. And so the city had a really hard time with that. I think that's all I have to add, because, like I say, the presentation you got from TJ was extremely thorough as to what they are doing and what they have done. And I have copies of their strategic plan and their bylaws for you if you would like to look at them.
Sure. Yeah.
So, yeah, I know it's a tough question, but did Tillamook come up with a strategy to get around density objections that you mentioned?
No, they just rezoned the areas.
That's it.
They listened, but then went ahead with the rezoning.
Okay.
And one of the impacts is that one of the areas that was rezoned to not require additional parking is the area that's going to have the 47-unit apartment complex. And so the developers are making additional accommodations for parking, but that was a real serious consideration for the neighbors in the area, that there was a possibility that you could have over 50 cars related to that that complex, and you only had parking for 30, and it wasn't really required because of the zoning.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of things you have to take into consideration.
Oh, yeah.
Unintended consequences that may rise their ugly head.
I remember, I think it was just after I became a counselor and got involved with the League of Oregon Cities, I think it was, we had a meeting in Tillamook, and I don't remember if it was you or somebody else, but you talked about, I don't think it was an actual urban renewal district, but it was renewal of downtown, and there was one property where you were going to be able to create a residential over commercial right in the downtown. Did that ever happen? It was part of the 101 redo,
Yes,
that
we
big
have.
project.
We have proposed residential over commercial in downtown Tillamook. Main Street gave a grant to one of the buildings to develop additional apartments over the building, and that's going to be in the downtown area. And we just had someone buy what was an old bank building, and they are going to be putting housing above that also.
So that was through some state program or what?
The grant for the housing over the in the theater area was from the Main Street program, and the Main Street program is part of the
Oregon
parks.
Heritage
Yes.
Commission. Okay. So that's all fairly new. It hasn't actually happened yet. Just the money's on the way.
They are
The checks in
working
the
on that.
mail?
Isn't Lisa Griner working on that?
She is, yes. One of the other things, if you don't mind me mentioning.
No, I don't mind.
One of the things that can be done, in addition to grant funding, there's a vertical housing development zone property tax exemption that the County Housing Commission is currently investigating, not only to share with our local communities, but to talk about with other communities where it could be beneficial.
What was it called?
Vertical housing development zone property tax exemption.
Huh.
It's a mouthful. But
Yeah.
it's a wonderful opportunity to incentivize exactly this. Here you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
We had a planning commissioner that was, well, he was on the planning commission before I was, and he just recently retired from all of that. But that was one of his big pushes, was we have a number of places that we could have residential over commercial here in the downtown core. And the big issue's always been the parking. What do you do about the parking? You don't want the residents that live there to be parking, down where the stores are or over in our convention center parking lot. So you
We
have to
had a
figure out
problem with
somewhere.
that because we have what is called the Tillamook Hotel. And I believe that there are 42 units in the Tillamook Hotel that are used for rental units. And parking was a big problem. We did have a dry cleaner in downtown Tillamook, and we looked at that site years ago for development, but discovered that it was so toxic because the dry cleaner had been just pouring all of the fluid into the ground, to the point that when we did the Highway 101 and 6 interchange there,
Yeah,
it was 3 blocks away, and that dry cleaning fluid was in the Hocourton Slough. It was one of the contaminants that had leached through the ground because of all of the rain we get, and it was in the slough.
flooding, yeah.
So it was determined early on that there was nothing that could be done with that piece of property, and so it was sealed with blacktop. And so it's a parking lot. And the people that live in the Tillamook Hotel can rent a space in that parking lot to park. The other thing is that there is a parking agreement in the city that in the core of the city, they can't park there if they live there during the day and take up a parking space that business could otherwise utilize. But they can park there in the evenings.
After hours.
So people move their cars into the downtown area in the evenings if they're going to be needing them for work or anything like that.
These bills that were mentioned, you served on the housing committee at the state level for
Yes.
several of those, didn't you?
Yes, I'm on the State Housing Committee. I'm also on another task force for looking at housing that we're putting a report together that will be issued in December.
Okay, good. Well, we know you have rural Oregon in your back of your mind all the time, so we appreciate that.
All the time.
All the time. Anybody out there have any questions?
Yeah, Jeff Adams with City of Cannon Beach. And like Steve said, we're going to be working on for the county here. Are you working with the Housing Authority at all? Your local housing authority or?
Yeah, so there's the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority that covers the Tri-County area. And we do work with them directly. In fact, we have a member of our housing commission duly appointed on both organizations. That person has recently resigned, but we'll be replacing that position through our Board of County Commissioners in the coming weeks.
Okay, well, thanks.
NOAA is a good partner. We have a NOAA housing about a block away from where I live, and it's very well maintained, and the residents there are a lot of nice people in there, and amazingly enough, with the housing shortage and their ability to take Section 8 folks, they've got 3 vacancies, so.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah, we I think what they were saying here is there's a waiting list of quite some,
2 to 3 years.
yeah, quite some
I'm
time.
hopefully sometime this week meeting with Clatsop County Commissioner Pamela Webb, who is on the board of NOAA. And not to give too much away, but the county has some land here in Seaside that we're working very diligently with them for the county to give to the city. And there is one particular site that we hopefully will be able to turn into housing someday. And I just need to educate myself about what NOAA is all about.
Yeah.
I guess they've struggled a little bit over the past few years, but they just appointed a new director. So things are looking up.
So they have hired someone for,
As far as I know, yeah.
Okay.
It was in the paper last week, I think.
okay,
I don't know who it is, but yes, they've hired someone.
perfect.
So we have 2 minutes. Anybody else? I really do stick to trying to make sure it's 1 hour. You can stay and talk as long as you want to afterwards, but officially we'll be done. I didn't introduce the folks over here. This is Jeff Flory. He was our interim planning director, and lo and behold, he was appointed 2 weeks ago now as actual official planning director, and we're very, very happy to have him with us. And that's Kim, our city recorder, filling in tonight. We have lots of people that fill in to help us with the electronic side, and we're greatly appreciative. Okay, well, we are officially done then. Look at that, I did it with 56 seconds to spare. Thank you very much, TJ and Suzanne. And TJ,